you believe them to be. They have no more importance and meaning than you give them. Nothing has meaning except for the meaning you give it. Recall how at the beginning of this book I suggested you don't believe a word I say? Well, if you really want to take off in your life, don't believe a word you say. And if you want instant enlightenment, don't believe a thought you think. Meanwhile, if you're like most people, you're going to believe something, so you might as well adopt beliefs that support you. Rich beliefs. Remember, thoughts lead to feelings, which lead to actions, which lead to results. You could choose to think and act like rich people do and therefore create the results that rich people create. The question is, how do rich people think and act? That's exactly what you discover in part 2 of this book. If you want to change your financial life forever, read on. Declaration. Place your hand on your heart and say, I observe my thoughts and entertain only those that empower me. Touch your head and say, I have a millionaire mind. Part 2. The Wealth Files. 17 ways rich people think and act differently from poor and middle class people. In part 1 of this book, we discuss the process of manifestation. Recall that thoughts lead to feelings. Feelings lead to actions, and actions lead to results. Everything begins with your thoughts, which are produced by your mind. Isn't it amazing that our mind is pretty much the basis for our life, and yet most of us have no clue as to how this powerful apparatus functions? So let's start by taking a simple look at how your mind works. Metaphorically, your mind is nothing more than a big file cabinet, similar to what you'd find in your office or home. All information that comes in is labeled and filed in folders so that it's easy to retrieve to help you survive. Did you hear that? I didn't say thrive, I said survive. In every situation, you go to the files of your mind to determine how to respond. Say, for example, you're considering a financial opportunity. You automatically go to your file labeled money and from there decide what to do. The only thoughts you can have about money will be what are stored in your money file. That's all you can think about because that's all that is in your mind under that category. You decide based on what you believe is logical, sensible, and appropriate for you at the time. You make what you think is the right choice. The problem, however, is that your right choice may not be a successful choice. In fact, what makes perfect sense to you may consistently produce perfectly poor results. For instance, let's say my wife is in the mall. That shouldn't be too hard for me to imagine. She sees this green purse. It's on sale for 25% off. She immediately goes to her mind files with the question, should I get this purse? In a nanosecond, her mind files come back with the answer, you've been looking for a green purse to go with those green shoes you bought last week. Plus, it's just the right size. Buy it. As she rushes to the checkout counter, her mind is not only thrilled that she's going to have this beautiful purse, but glowing with pride that she got it for 25% off. To her mind, this purchase makes perfect sense. She wants it. She believes she needs it, and it is such a deal. However, at no point did her mind come up with the thought, true, this is a real nice purse, and true, this is a great deal, but right now I'm $3,000 in debt, so I'd better hold off. She didn't come up with that information because no file in her head contains that. The file of when you're in debt, don't buy any more was never installed in her. It doesn't exist, which means that particular choice is not an option. Do you catch my drift? If you've got files in your cabinet that are non-supportive to financial success, those will be the only choices you can make. They'll be natural, automatic, and make perfect sense to you. But in the end, they will still produce financial failure or mediocrity at best. Conversely, if you got mind files that support financial success, you will naturally and automatically make decisions that produce success. You won't have to think about it. Your normal way of thinking will result in success, kind of like Donald Trump. His normal way of thinking produces wealth. When it comes to money, wouldn't it be incredible if you could inherently think how rich people think? I sure hope you said absolutely or something to that effect. Well, you can. As we stated previously, the first step to any change is awareness, meaning the first step to thinking the way rich people think is to know how rich people think. Rich people think very differently from poor and middle class people. They think differently about money, wealth, themselves, other people, and pretty well every other facet of life. In part 2 of this book, we're going to examine some of these differences, and as part of your reconditioning, install 17 alternative wealth files into your mind. With new files come new choices. You could then catch yourself when you are thinking like poor and middle class people and consciously shift your focus to how rich people think. Remember, you could choose to think in ways that will support you in your happiness and success instead of ways that don't. A few caveats to begin. First, in no way, shape, or form do I mean to degrade poor people or want to appear to be without compassion for their situation. I do not believe that rich people are better than poor people. They're just richer. At the same time, I want to make sure you get the message, so I'm going to make the distinctions between rich and poor as extreme as possible. Second, when I discuss rich, poor, and middle class people, what I'm referring to is their mentality. How different folks think and act rather than the actual amount of money they've got or their value to society. Third, I will be generalizing big time. I understand that not all rich and not all poor people are the way I'm describing them to be. Again, my objective is to make sure you get the point of each principle and use it. Fourth, for the most part, I will not always be referring to the middle class specifically because middle class people usually have a mix of rich and poor mentalities. Again, my goal is for you to become aware of where you fit on the scale and to think more like the rich if you want to create more wealth. Fifth, several of the principles in this section may appear to deal more with habits and actions than with ways of thinking. Remember, our actions come from our feelings, which come from our thoughts. Consequently, every rich action is preceded by a rich way of thinking. Finally, I'm going to ask you to be willing to let go of being right. What I mean by that is being willing to let go of having to do it your way. Why? Because your way has gotten you exactly what you've got right now. If you want more of the same, keep doing it your way. If you're not yet rich, however, maybe it's time you consider a different way, especially one that comes from someone who is really, really rich and has put thousands of others on the road to wealth too. It's up to you. The concepts you're about to learn are simple but profound. They make real changes for real people in the real world. How do I know? At my company, we get thousands of letters and emails each year telling us how each individual wealth file has transformed people's lives. If you learn them and use them, I'm confident they will transform your life too. At the end of each section, you will find a declaration and a physical movement with which to anchor it into your body. You will also find actions to take to support you in adopting this wealth file. It is imperative you put each file into action in your life as quickly as possible so that the knowledge can move to a physical, cellular level and create lasting and permanent change. Most people understand we are creatures of habit, but what they don't realize is that there are actually two kinds of habits: doing habits and not doing habits. Everything you are not doing right now, you are in the habit of not doing. The only way to change these not doing habits into doing habits is to do them. Reading will assist you, but it's a whole different world when you go from reading to doing. If you are truly serious about success, prove it and do the actions suggested. Wealth file number 1. Rich people believe I create my life. Poor people believe life happens to me. If you want to create wealth, it is imperative that you believe that you are the steering wheel of your life, especially your financial life. If you don't believe this, then you must inherently believe that you have little or no control over your life, and therefore you have little or no control over your financial success. That is not a rich attitude. Did you ever notice that it's usually poor people who spend a fortune playing the lottery? They actually believe their wealth is going to come from someone picking their name out of a hat. They spend Saturday night glued to the TV excitedly watching the draw to see if wealth is going to land on them this week. Sure, everyone wants to win the lottery, and even rich people play for fun once in a while. But first, they don't spend half their paycheck on tickets, and second, winning the lotto is not their primary strategy for creating wealth. You have to believe that you are the one who creates your success, that you are the one who creates your mediocrity, and that you are the one creating your struggle around money and success. Consciously or unconsciously, it's still you. Instead of taking responsibility for what's going on in their lives, poor people choose to play the role of the victim. A victim's predominant thought is often poor me. So presto, by virtue of the law of intention, that's literally what victims get. They get to be poor. Notice that I said they play the role of victim. I didn't say they are victims. I don't believe anyone is a victim. I believe people play the victim because they think it gets them something. We'll discuss this in more detail shortly. That said, how can you tell when people are playing the victim? They leave 3 obvious clues. Now, before we talk about these clues, I want you to realize that I fully understand that none of these ways of being has anything to do with anyone reading this book. But maybe, just maybe, you might know someone who can relate. And maybe, just maybe, you might know that person intimately. Either way, I suggest you pay close attention to this section. Victim clue number 1, blame. When it comes to why they're not rich, most victims are professionals at the blame game. The object of this game is to see how many people and circumstances you can point the finger at without ever looking at yourself. It's fun for victims, at least. Unfortunately, it's not such a blast for anyone else who is unlucky enough to be around them. That's because those in close proximity to victims become easy targets. Victims blame the economy, they blame the government, they blame the stock market, they blame their broker, they blame their type of business, they blame their employer, they blame their employees, they blame their manager, they blame the head office, they blame their upline or their downline, they blame customer service, they blame the shipping department, they blame their partner, they blame their spouse, they blame God, and of course they always blame their parents. It's always someone else or something else that is to blame. The problem is anything or anyone but them. Victim clue number 2, justifying. If victims aren't blaming, you'll often find them justifying or rationalizing their situation by saying something like, money's not really important. Let me ask you this question. If you said that your husband or your wife or your boyfriend or your girlfriend or your partner or your friend weren't all that important, would any of them be around for long? I don't think so, and neither would money. At my live seminar, some participants always come up to me and say, you know, Harv, money's not really that important. I look them directly in the eyes and say, you're broke, right? They usually look down at their feet and meekly reply with something like, well, right now I'm having a few financial challenges, but I interrupt. No, it's not just right now. You've always been broke or close to it. Yes or yes. At this point, they usually nod their head in agreement and woefully return to their seats, ready to listen and learn as they finally realize what a disastrous effect this one belief has had on their lives. Of course they're broke. Would you have a motorcycle if it wasn't important to you? Of course not. Would you have a pet parrot if it wasn't important to you? Of course not. In the same way, if you don't think money is important, you simply won't have any. You can actually dazzle your friends with this insight. Imagine you're in a conversation with a friend who tells you money's not important. Put your hand on your forehead and look up as though you are getting a message from the heavens. Then exclaim, you're broke. To which your shocked friend will undoubtedly respond, how did you know? Then you stretch out your palm and you reply, what else do you want to know? That'll be $50, please. Let me put it bluntly. Anyone who says money isn't important doesn't have any. Rich people understand the importance of money and the place it has in our society. On the other hand, poor people validate their financial ineptitude by using irrelevant comparisons. They'll argue, well, money isn't as important as love. Now, is that comparison dumb or what? What's more important, your arm or your leg? Maybe they're both important. Listen up, my friends. Money is extremely important in the areas in which it works and extremely unimportant in the areas in which it doesn't. And although love may make the world go round, it sure doesn't pay for the building of any hospitals, churches, or homes. It also doesn't feed anybody. Not convinced? Try paying your bills with love. Still not sure? Then pop on over to the bank and try depositing some love and see what happens. I'll save you the trouble. The teller will look at you as if you just gone AWOL from the loony bin and scream only one word: security. No rich people believe money is not important. And if I fail to persuade you and you still somehow believe that money is not important, then I only have two words for you: you're broke, and you always will be until you eradicate that non-supportive file from your financial blueprint. Victim clue number 3, complaining. Complaining is the absolute worst possible thing you could do for your health or your wealth. The worst. Why? I'm a big believer in the universal law that states what you focus on expands. When you are complaining, what are you focusing on? What's with your life or what's wrong with it? What's right with your life or what's wrong with it? You are obviously focusing on what's wrong with it. And since what you focus on expands, you'll keep getting more of what's wrong. Many teachers in the personal development field talk about the law of attraction. It states that like attracts like, meaning that when you are complaining, you are actually attracting crap into your life. Have you ever noticed that complainers usually have a tough life? It seems that everything that could go wrong does go wrong for them. They say, of course I complain. Look how crappy my life is. And now that you know better, you can explain to them, no, it's because you complain that your life is so crappy. Shut up and don't stand near me. Which brings us to another point. You still have to make darn sure not to put yourself in the proximity of complainers. If you absolutely have to be nearby, make sure you bring a steel umbrella or the crap meant for them will get you too. I stay as far away from complainers as possible because negative energy is infectious. Plenty of people, however, love